Well, Deuteronomy chapter 21 today is going to be a little controversial. There's a few things we get to learn in here that aren't quite as applicable today in our day and age as they were back then. So this is going to be really interesting to understand a little bit more about how to reconcile uh, when somebody is murdered, basically, as well as how do you deal with your kids if they get unruly and have problems. So some pretty crazy rules and things we get to learn from this that are pretty interesting. Okay, verse 1. If one be found slain in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it, lying in the field, and it be not known who hath slain him, then thy elders and thy judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. And it shall be that the city which is next unto the slain man, even the elders of that city, shall take a heifer, which shall not be wrought with, and which hath not drawn in the yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer unto a rough valley, which is neither eared nor sown, and shall strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. And the priests and the sons of Levi shall come near, for them the Lord thy God hath chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of the Lord. And by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. So just to go in, before we continue on with this, so that what they're talking about here is basically, let's say somebody dies, somebody is murdered. You say, oh, this person's clearly been like stabbed to death or cut. They're dead, but we don't know who did it. So what do we do about that? How do we make restitution for this? Because it's still an abomination. It's still a desecration not only of life but of the land to have a dead body on the land, as they've talked about in the past. So what they say is they basically measure from where that person's dead, which city is the closest city. That city that is the closest geographically to where that person is dead has to offer this sacrifice. You take this heifer and you take them out into a field, basically, that is not eared nor sown, meaning there's nothing growing in the field. Okay, you didn't plant the field. The, the, the field's not planted, hasn't been harvested. Okay, it's not used for growing food. So you're going out into just a field of wildflowers, random grasses, off into the wilderness type area. And then you're going to cut the cow's head off, basically. And then the priests of Levi shall come down as well to minister, because again, that's their job as the priest to administer in the sacrifices and things. So verse 6, let's pick this up. All the elders of that city that are next unto the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer that is beheaded in the valley. They shall answer and say, our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge. And the blood shall be forgiven them. Thou shalt put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. So this is how we pay a repentance or a forgiveness. We go through the sacrifice to say, hey, we didn't do this. We don't know who did this, but please don't punish us or cause problems on us because of what has happened to this person, basically. And it's interesting that it's the closest geographic city to the place where that person died that has to do this, basically. Probably because, and this is total conjecture, of course, but probably just because most likely that's the city where that person lives. They probably didn't dwell that, they didn't have to cross past a city to get to their land. They probably lived in that city, and so that city is most likely where that person lived, or where those maybe the murderer even lived in that city. We don't know. Maybe the murderer was a stranger, but it's interesting still that principle is there. If you have any other ideas on that, please put them in the comments. Okay, now verse 10, we're going to talk about war. When thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive, and seest among the captives a beautiful woman, and hast a desire unto her, that thou wouldest have her to thy wife, then thou shalt bring her home to thine house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails. She shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thine house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month. And after that Thou shalt go in unto her, and be her husband, and she shall be thy wife. And it shall be, if thou have no delight in her, then thou shalt let her go whither she will. But thou shalt not sell her at all for money. Thou shalt not make merchandise of her, because thou hast humbled her. So I think this is really fascinating that this is in here, basically, because uh, understanding again, this is one of those examples where God is sensitive to the feelings and effects of his daughters, to women. Because again, you can't just, war isn't, oh, we're going to go in, hey, look, here's a beautiful woman. I'm just going to take her to my wife. We see this in military atrocities constantly these days, where women are afraid in war because they are raped, they are sexually abused, they have problems. And of course, that is all illegal and immoral and not good by God. You've committed sin. You have to pay repentance for all that. What they're saying here is, if you find a woman while you're fighting, and you're like, ooh, I would like to have her as my wife, here is the process to do that. Okay. You can't just take her. You can't just have your way with her, basically. She has say in this. She has feelings. We need to be sensitive to those feelings. So while she, in a way, is a spoil of war, so to speak, because her family is wiped out in the battle, her nation has been destroyed in the battle. They lost the fight. You can take her to your house and marry her, okay, but you have to give her a whole month where she can be by herself, and you feed her, help her out. She takes the clothes she used to wear, gets rid of those, puts on more newer clothes that would fit for your nation, and then she has a whole month to mourn. You can't do anything with her. She just lives at your house and is in mourning. You have to go a whole month, basically. Once that month is done, then you can finish the marriage and consummate it, basically. If then, though, you decide to divorce her, okay, then you let her go. She is free. There's no slavery. There's no indentured servitude. You can't make money off of her. You can't enrich yourself from her, because, again, you took her from her family. You took her from her home. You took her from where she used to live, her nation, and you brought her into your home. So you have to just freely let her go, and she can go. She can stay in the area. She can move, whatever. She is free, basically. So that's important. I like that God has at least rules to help understand and be sensitive to his daughter's needs. It's really good. Now, verse 15, if a man have two wives, one beloved and another hated, and they have borne him children, both the beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers that was hated, so this is getting to a really, getting right down into, here's a specific scenario that could arise. You have two wives, your wife that you don't like has the firstborn son, basically. In fact, Hugh Nibley made this comment in his book, Approaching Zion. That is the essence of the law, complete fairness at all times. So this is a good point that this chapter is bringing out, is being fair to people. That's part of that Master Mahan principle. Verse 16, then it shall be, when he maketh his sons to inherit that which he hath, that he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the hated, which is indeed the firstborn. Excuse me. So what they're saying here basically is just because you hate your wife and her son is the firstborn child that you have, doesn't mean you can't give them an inheritance. You have to be fair to them. He is the firstborn, so he actually gets inheritance. So verse 17, but he shall acknowledge the son of the hated for the firstborn, by giving him a double portion of all that he hath, for he is the beginning of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. So you can't pick and choose, oh, I love this other wife, and so I'm going to give all my inheritance to her kids and exempt my other wife's kids out. You have to be fair. You can't play sides. You have to be fair with people. Verse 18, if a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto them. So this is getting to a whole nother principle here. So let's say you have a son Their daughters aren't mentioned in this one, specifically sons are mentioned. If you have a son who is rebellious, okay, he doesn't obey what mom and dad say, he's not following those commandments, he's not listening to people, he's probably wild and crazy, he's probably committing crimes, he's probably very, very rebellious. This is what you are to do with him. Verse 19, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him and bring him out unto the elders of his city and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. So this is probably a son that is not young. Most likely these are older children, like adult age children. They are committing crimes. They are lazy. They're drunkards. They're not contributors to society. They're not following the commandments. They've kind of gone very rebellious against God as well. So you bring him before the elders of the city out at the gate. Verse 21, and all the men of his city shall stone him with stones, that he die. So shall put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. So now this is a controversial idea. Because if you think about this, okay, what they're saying is if you have a son who's of adult age that is not keeping the commandments, that is kind of gone crazy, riotous living, he's not following, the house rules as well, and those things, that he needs to be, it's capital punishment, it's execution for that, basically. That sounds really, really harsh. But let's keep some things in perspective here. So in the Old Testament student manual, here's a couple things that they mentioned about this. Modern readers are shocked at this requirement, and some try to use it as proof of the primitive and savage nature of the law. The following points are important in considering this requirement. This requirement, like all else in the Mosaic Law, was given by the Lord, who was a pre-mortal Jesus. It is consistent with all other aspects of his nature. The law was not speaking of just disobedient children, but of incorrigible children, those to whom no counsel or guidance was meaningful. So not just ones that are being disobedient, but ones that basically refuse to follow any rules or guidance. They want to be outside the law for everything. Almost certainly, these were children who had reached maturity. The charge of drunkard is evidenced for this view. Small children would not qualify as incorrigible. The parents have tried all other means of correction, and all have failed. So you've tried his whole life. You've tried to help your son to keep the commandments. You've tried to help them be good citizens, to be good neighbors, good members of the family. Nothing is working. They've gone completely bad, just wrong. They're, not following any principles, almost like they're trying to make this life for themselves that is completely contrary to the rest of society, or at least what society holds to be good. Although the parents had to bring charges against their own child, they were not required to execute him, as were the witnesses in other capital crimes. If you remember, if you saw somebody kill somebody and you were a witness against them, you were the first ones to throw those stones to execute them. That was just a couple chapters ago we talked about that. Now, since the family is the basic unit of society and the most important means of transmitting righteousness from generation to generation, the child who utterly rejected parental authority threatened the very order of society. Thus, like the idolater, he must be put to death. A parent who upheld his child in crime became a contributor to crime in society. So this is a quote that I have here from the Institutes of Biblical Law, page 78, from Rushdoony. He says, to deny the death penalty is to insist on life for the evil. It means that evil men are given the right to kill, kidnap, rape, and violate law and order, and their life is guaranteed against death in the process. The murderer is given the right to kill without losing his life, and the victim and potential victims are denied their right to live. Men may speak of unconditional love and unconditional mercy, but every act of love and mercy is conditional because In granting it to one man, I am affirming the conditions of his life and denying others in the process. If I am loving and merciful to a murderer, I am unloving and merciless to his present and future victims. Moreover, I am then in open contempt of God and his law, which requires no mercy to a man guilty of death. If the parents refused to complain against their son, they were then guilty of condemnation and or participation in his crimes. Their role was thus a formal but necessary one. Would the family align itself with justice or stand in terms of blood ties? In view of the strong nature of family loyalties, the parental participation was necessary in order to ensure freedom from feud and also to place the family firmly against its criminal members. A parent refusing to file a complaint in such a case would become a party to the offense and a defender of crime. The principle required was clear-cut. Not blood, but law must govern. Clearly, then, the intent of this law is that all incorrigible and habitual criminals be executed. If a criminal son is to be executed, how much more so a neighbor or fellow Hebrew who has become an incorrigible criminal? If the family must align itself with the execution of an incorrigibly delinquent son, will it not demand the death of an habitual criminal in the community? That is very important, okay? Now, that such is the intent of the law appears from its stated purpose. So thou shalt put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. The purpose of the law is to eliminate entirely a criminal element from the nation and a professional criminal class. The family is not permitted the evil privilege of saying, we will stand by our boy, come what may. The family itself must join the war on crime. So think for a moment of how strongly parents would strive to turn their children from sin, knowing that if they failed, they would have to go through the horror of taking them to the judges for execution. Surely they would chasten them in every possible way to see that such an event never happened. In a world of permissive child rearing and the ensuing destruction of righteousness, the lesson of this passage has great meaning. So this is important for us in our day to think about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about this idea. So what this is saying, basically, if you have a son that you've tried everything to help, they're still wicked, they're still breaking all the laws, they're habitual criminals, they have lots of problems, they're basically a menace to society, they are bringing society down, they are causing problems for other people, whether that's theft or rapes or abuses or other problems, they are ruining the lives of others. It's our job to family is important. Remember, we've talked so many times about this Master Mahan principle that life is more important than property. The only change to this is when life is promoting evil. So if that life is promoting evil, then that life is forfeit, according to God. Now, this sounds harsh. Now, we have to understand this from an eternal perspective, is that there is a life after this life, okay? There's a spirit world that we go to. That's kind of a holding place, if you will, before the great judgments and everything else. From an LDS perspective, we believe repentance still exists in that life to an extent, okay? People have to accept it, for one. They have to be willing to go through it. And the problem is they can't fulfill it because they don't have a body to fulfill the ordinances to fulfill with repentance and things like baptism and those kinds of things. So that's where proxy work comes into play. But realize that this is taking a larger perspective, not just this life, but realizing the whole perspective of life, okay? Just like the same point with Nephi and Laban, all right, that it was better that Laban die than a nation dwindle in unbelief. Not having those scriptures would have caused major spiritual destruction for people's lives for many generations. So one wicked man should not stand in the way of many people being righteous. So, or learning the gospel and contributing to having things go better. So, and it's this important point that they've had all through the law of Moses, that life is important. However, if that life chooses to go to evil and is not coming back, now this isn't just, oh, they committed one crime, They are habitually doing this. They've spent years in crime. They're in and out of jails. They're in and out of causing problems. They are a complete menace to society. You've tried and 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 tried to help them. Now we reach the end of that point. Okay, just like with the Canaanites, I'm sure they've had opportunities for repentance. They've had other people come preach to them. There's other prophets, like we heard with Balaam. You remember? He had the gift of prophecy as well, even though he wasn't a part of Israel. The Canaanites lost their chance. They were done. They reached a point of no return, and they're done. An individual can reach that point too, and that's the challenge that we're having here. Is if your son is that person who reaches that point, the parents have a responsibility to take care of that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on this as well. And we got 2 more verses to go through on this chapter here. If a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, and thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. So this is another important point, realizing that if they are worthy of death and you hang them, that's what you do. You hang them from the tree, okay? If you do, though, they can stay there for the rest of the day, but they have to be taken down the next day. So we unfortunately have to execute them, but their execution doesn't need to linger. We don't need to make this a problem with the land, anything like that. So we need to bring them down and not defile the land, and not watch their body rot. There's still a sense of not decency, but necessarily respect for them, and just realize, okay, they're dead. Yes, we don't need to make this a bigger issue. Okay, this is in Clark in his Bible commentary book said, its exposure for the space of 1 day was judged sufficient. The law which required this answered all the ends of the public justice, exposed the shame and infamy of the conduct, but did not put to torture the feelings of humanity by requiring a perpetual exhibition of a human being, a slow prey to the most loathsome process of putrefaction. In the case given in the text, God considers the land as defiled while the body of the executed criminal lay exposed. Hence it was enjoined, thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. So some pretty powerful things we got to talk about today. Look forward to seeing in the comments your thoughts of what we've talked about today as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next chapter for more.